Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Patty, can we do a roll call, please?
Commissioner DeSanta, Whitehouse,
Here.
McCaffrey,
Here.
Moyer, here, Shalay, here, Knapp, here, Sarter.
Here. Any additions or deletions from the agenda tonight? No, sir. You. Anyone from the public wish to speak on non-agenda items tonight? So this is anything aside from the zoning map. There'll be public comment time for that later on tonight. Okay, nothing on agenda. Consideration of minutes. I think Cody has a quick revision to the minutes from November.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. When we put the minutes out in the agenda packet, one of our commissioners was quick to point out that there was an error in the copy and paste error on the voting for agenda item 6A. And that correction has been made in your amended minutes that were sent out. It changed the vote from 1 nay to no nays on agenda item 6A, so that motion passed 4-0.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bird. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from November?
I move to approve the meeting minutes from November.
I'll second that. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Whitehouse,
Yes.
McCaffrey,
Abstain.
Moyer,
Yes.
Shalay,
Yes.
Knapp,
Abstain.
Sarter.
Yes.
I thought so.
Need a second there? Okay, we'll move on to the new business. We're going to conduct a public hearing tonight regarding the adoption of the zone map. Before we get started with the public hearing, does anyone have any conflicts of interest or ex parte communications to disclose? No, sir.
No.
Okay, fantastic. Mr. Bird, if you're ready with the presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd also like to take just a quick minute to review the public hearing procedures. It's always a good reminder to have that, excuse me, fresh in our minds. I'm also loading a presentation to the screen share, hoping that the monitors will work there. So on your public hearing procedures, there are a couple of steps that we'll follow. I'll start with providing an introduction to the topic. The public hearing is on as updates to the town's official zoning map. This is largely a legislative matter, but we're treating it as a public hearing to give everyone an opportunity. If the property might be impacted, we want to give them an opportunity to be heard. And we'll do that for both the planning commission and the board of trustees. So there's additional steps in this process. But your procedures for public hearing include a staff presentation. We'll open the floor for public comments. After the close of public comments, there'll be an opportunity for staff to address those comments or questions. And we'll try to do all the public comments at one time. And if anyone wishing to speak has something specific about their property, staff would love to meet with them one-on-one, make sure we can answer all those questions. If we have follow-ups to those individuals and their property concerns for tonight's discussion, we can call them back up after the public hearing is closed for specific dialogue relative to their unique circumstances. So following the close of the hearing, we'll do staff address those comments, and then we'll allow the board or the commission to have discussion and deliberations. In this particular hearing item, even though the planning commission has been working on this agenda topic for a couple of months and had quite a bit of discussion on it, not every homeowner maybe has heard the same thing. So we wanted to give plenty of opportunity for every resident or owner who might be impacted to have opportunities, multiple opportunities to be heard and address their questions and concerns. So that's kind of an overview of the process and why we're doing this. Are there any questions on procedures? No. Okay, perfect. It's actually one of my slides in here too. So I'll be a little bit repetitive, but I'll leave the next steps for the slideshow and I'll go over that as well. See if I'm not sure why the monitors in room aren't working.
Because they won't move. Again.
Commissioners, I know I did put a paper copy of the slide presentation at your seats tonight, so you have that. I was hoping to run it on the monitors in room 2 so that members of the audience have it. While we're troubleshooting that, I'll also point out just a couple of room amenities that we've set up tonight. On the wall behind Chairman McCaffrey and Chairman Whitehouse are 2 maps. The one on the left is one of the draft work session maps that the planning commission was working on. You can, if you get close enough, you can see all the Sharpie markings with the planning commission discussed zone district and general areas for what made sense based on what we knew at the time. So that was, we brought that just as reference so you can see kind of the progress that was made over a series of work sessions. Then around the room, we have 3 maps put up. There's one on the right side next to Chairman McCaffrey. And the same map is also duplicated on the wall over here to the right and the wall over here to the left. There are also a few snacks and some water bottles over here. And if anyone would like, please avail yourselves of that as well. So, and now we have a presentation on the screen. So we're going to rock and roll. So tonight's agenda item, as we said, is a consideration for updates to the town's official zoning map. Just to kind of highlight what this means, the town has undergone a series of steps to update the comprehensive plan for the town. A comprehensive plan is a long-range vision for where the community sees itself in 20 or 30 years or beyond. It kind of sets the stage for, as a vision document, it sets the stage for the land use code, the zoning map, and other regulatory documents and procedures that guide growth and development in the town. The planning commission adopted that comprehensive plan in August of 2021, a little over a year ago. And earlier this year, the planning commission had made recommendations on changes to the land use code to put the regulations in place to support the vision of the comprehensive plan. And on March 22nd of this spring, the Board of Trustees also adopted that land use code and put it in place. So subsequent to those efforts, the next step is updating the town's official zoning map. This process that we're undertaking right now will help to bring the map. It's a legal document. It states these are the properties depicted graphically and the zone district that's applied to those properties. And it sets the stage for these are the regulations that are applicable to each specific property within the town of Wallington. That's the process that we're working on now. So you can see that. Just to kind of highlight the most significant changes to the zone map. And actually the draft one on the left is behind Commissioner McCaffrey, is pretty illustrative of the reason why we needed some changes and needed to make some updates. The prior zone map didn't even have things like the high school, middle school included on it. So other properties that have been annexed in recent years were included. We've recently undergone a series of public hearings and zone change requests that some were approved and some were not, that need to be updated and reflected on this map. And we also have a number of properties that didn't have any zoning applied to them, even though they're in the town. So we need to fix those and fill in some holes. And the more intricate nature of the zoning changes that were discussed in the land use code included removing the transitional zone district from our code. The transitional zone district was identified as a commercial zone district that was contained properties with a mix of commercial uses and residential uses, but that were transitioning generally to a commercial use. It required any new use to be heard as a conditional use hearing, which didn't exactly provide a lot of clarity for properties that were zone transitional to know what they could do, what the neighbors could do, or if you're a potential purchaser, what a purchaser might be able to do with that property. It just left a lot of uncertainties and all subject to public hearings and conditional use approvals. So it wasn't really serving its need to identify a clear direction for what those areas would be zoned. And because of that, the planning commission and the board of trustees decided that transitional zone district was no longer serving its intended purpose and removed it from the code, which leaves a number of properties in town with needing to identify a new zone district. The planning commission met in work session 4 times, between May and September to consider, what appropriate zone districts might be applied to those transitional properties. And following, I think we had 4 work sessions, we went through at least 3 different iterations where we changed the map each time. With, different inputs and variables that were discussed for each area of town and for different properties to kind of reach this feels like the right recommendation, and planning commission's direction was to have staff draw that up. That resulted in the map with the giant draft across it. We wanted to make sure everyone understands. Nothing's been set in stone. This is a draft. So we conducted those work sessions. On the screen that I'm showing right now, I know it's a super small scale, but that's the town's existing zone map. And I'm going to transition the slide now from the what's existing today to this. This is the same draft version that's on the walls. We did remove the draft label just so you can read it a little easier on the screen. So this reflects all of the changes that have been proposed by the planning commission throughout those work sessions. And I'm going to cycle away from the slide just because this map is up in the room. So if anyone wants to get up and take a closer look, you can certainly do so. So as I described, the work sessions with the planning commission got us to where we are today in terms of the proposed changes on the zone map. And we also wanted to highlight the different ways that we've advertised that this change was coming. Obviously, the town's gone through quite a bit of effort with the comprehensive plan and the land use code. And now the commission's worked on this particular topic. But we wanted to make sure the word got out. So we've published tonight's public hearing in the Fort Collins, Colorado, and that satisfies the legal publication requirements for a public hearing. We've also posted the official agenda on all the town's official posting locations, advertising the hearing and the agenda topics. And just a number of weeks ago, town staff sent 815 individually addressed letters to every property owner that was seeing a change as a result of the zone map. We included example copies of those in your agenda packet, along with there were 4 different letters because there were 4 different main themes for what those changes entailed, and those examples are in the packet. I will note that although we sent 815 letters, we did get some of those letters back. When we send the letters, we send them to the official owner of record as identified by the Larimer County Assessor's Office. Some property owners don't have they have a PO box, and their official posting or post office address on the county assessor's record is their physical address. So in those instances, if you have a PO box and your PO box isn't of record with the county, those letters came back to town staff. We have all of those that were returned to us. We'll be happy to share them. If you have neighbors that you've talked to that didn't get a letter and thought they should have, it's likely that it's in our office is undeliverable because of the PO box. But we'll certainly, we want to hear from everyone. So if there are owners out there that felt like they should have gotten a letter, we probably have it. Reach out to town staff because we want to have those conversations as well and make sure that we can answer any questions. And then on the bottom of this slide, tonight is a public hearing. It's been advertised. We've sent notices. And so tonight is an official public hearing for the planning commission. The board of trustees will also conduct a public hearing on the same topic. The planning commission will forward a recommendation to the board of trustees to consider, and then the board of trustees will conduct a public hearing, hear public comments, and they can either make a decision at that time. They can ask staff to address some questions or concerns, and they may even, if there's topics that they feel needs further discussion, they can send it back to the planning commission for further evaluation. So this is certainly not a process that has been moving quickly. It's one that's been moving very deliberately to make sure that we cover all the bases and make informed decisions and provide opportunities for everyone to be heard. No dates yet for the board of trustees hearing. It will be duly advertised with publishing in the Coloradoan, and notification letters will be sent again. So we certainly are trying every effort that we can to get the word out there and specifically address those that are impacted. So after we sent the letters out to individual property owners, just real quickly, I'll highlight the examples in your packet. But The transitional zone district is one that we specifically sent a letter that stated, this is your property that's of record for the county assessor's office. And it's the letter identifies that your property is currently zoned transitional. And based on conversations with the planning commission, this is the zone district that was recommended for your property. Please contact town staff if you have questions or comments on that, and please attend the public hearing that was scheduled for tonight. The second letter category, I'll call it, was R4 zoning to R3 zoning. R4 zoning under the prior land use code was for multifamily, like apartments and condos. And we only had a couple properties zoned R4. They were primarily along Saratoga, where there were townhomes that were zoned R4, townhomes in Harvest Village, and townhomes and condos at the east of the highway and the south of the town by Wellville Park. That's probably the wrong name now. But those properties with that little bit higher density had R4 zoning. The R4 zoning was most compatible with the R3 zoning as we find in the new land use code. Very few differences between those two zone districts. It was primarily a change in the title, but we wanted to make sure that folks knew about that in case they have documents or records and they need to update them. The third category of letter that was sent was for properties that were previously zoned or currently are zoned R2 and are proposed to be zoned to R4. R2 is a medium density, single family detached neighborhood. R4 was specifically changed and written during the land use code process. We heard a lot of public comments that the old town neighborhoods, you wanted to keep and retain and reflect the residential character and the architectural character of the craftsman farmhouse and Victorian style homes that exist in those areas. And so through the land use code process, we wrote that R4 zone district specifically for the downtown neighborhoods. And in the implementation of that zone district, the planning commission had identified that areas generally between Washington and Roosevelt and First Street to Sixth Street was the areas where those R4 zone district provisions would make the most sense. And so that was what was recommended. If you own a home within those four major streets, you probably received a letter that said that the recommended change is to change your zone district from R2 to R4. Along that same vein, I will also point out there was a lot of conversation during the comprehensive plan land use code updates, reflecting that owners of homes along Harrison Avenue and McKinley Avenue, those two streets were zone transitional before, and at one point in the comprehensive plan process, there was a suggestion made that those properties should continue to become commercial, and we heard a lot of public comment about that topic, that those wanted to stay residential, and that's where the R4 zoning will come into play as well. Properties along Harrison Avenue, McKinley Avenue were proposed on this zone map update to be zoned R4, which is a residential zone district. So I wanted to highlight that because I know it got a lot of attention and comments during our previous processes. And we've definitely heard that and reflected those changes on the map revisions. And the fourth category, there were just a handful of properties that either didn't have a zone district, applied to it for whatever reason, annexed at different times or what have you, but they just didn't have a zone district assigned, or there were a couple that really didn't make sense to have light industrial zoning along Cleveland Avenue. In those instances, the planning commission had asked, can we change that? And we said, well, we'll certainly notify those owners of a proposed change and we'll listen for any feedback. So we did send those letters advising those property owners that a recommendation had been made to change their property zoning to make, in this case, C3 mixed use commercial instead of light industrial. So thanks for sticking with me on that explanation. I'm trying to cover a lot of bases here. But after we sent these letters out, we did receive some phone calls. And many people stopped in to talk with town staff. And so we've been documenting those questions and concerns. A few of the questions are very specific to individual properties. They have a different idea or different vision for the use of their property than the zoning allows. And we were trying to hear those comments. But we also identified a couple of themes. The same questions were coming up multiple times from different owners. And so we put a couple of those things in the packet and then on the slideshow here, just wanted to cover the three most common questions that we've been hearing so far. The first question that we've been asked is, what's this letter about? What action is the town taking? And so we've been explaining what we have introduced tonight. This is an update to the official zoning map. It brings the zoning map into compliance with the land use code and the comprehensive plan. And it's just the last step in this series of updates. So we've answered that question a number of times. The second question we've heard a lot of is, how will this zone map update impact me and how will it impact the use of my property? So we wanted to obviously be really, playing with those individuals asking that question. There are a lot of protections built into the land use code when something changes. There's an entire article, Article 7 covers non-conforming properties and non-conforming uses. Those provisions are explicitly put into the code to protect property owner rights when something changes. If there's zoning changes, like is proposed tonight, if the lot boundaries change as a result of road realignments or their neighbors changing the use of their property, there's just a lot of need to protect existing rights. And that was prevalent in the conversations we heard during the land use code. But we specifically point out a couple of those sections here as it applies to the zone map updates. If you have an existing use on your property that's been legally existing, you're allowed to continue that use. Even if your zoning changes, your use of your property can stay just the way it is until you decide you want to make a change. That's a protected right within the land use code that's built in. Then there's a little bit more detail on non-conforming uses and non-conforming structures. So a non-conforming use example, I'll use the most basic one because we heard a lot about it. If I have a commercial business on Harrison and it's now zoned R4, then the commercial business use may become non-conforming. You can continue to operate that business use as long as you keep it that way. If you have a house and your property is rezoned commercial, you can continue to live in that house and operate that as a residence until such time as you feel that you need to make a change. So the uses refer back to your table of uses in Article 4 of your land use code. Then there's non-conforming buildings and structures. So this is the physical construction. So if a zone district change resulted in smaller lot sizes and your property or changes the dimensional standards for setbacks, lot size, lot width, any of those things, if it's a dimensional standard, you might have a non-conforming structure and the structure no longer meets the setbacks that were applied at the time it was built. In that case, that building or structure is still protected. You can still operate that building, you can still use that building, you can repair that building, you can modify that building, you can do all the maintenance and upkeep on it that you need to do to keep it viable. It's only when you change that entire structure to something it wasn't originally intended for that you might have to look at bringing it into compliance. So I know that's a mouthful, and it's certainly something that we don't want to gloss over. There are more details. I'll respond to any specific questions that you might have, but we wanted to highlight that there are protections in the code in the form of our nonconformities article. I'll also point out that another protection your code has is the process for a variance. The Board of Adjustments has the ability to hear case-by-case basis on applications where if I own a property and my property is aggrieved by a change in the zoning district where I can no longer do what I wanted to do, you can bring that case in the form of a variance to the Board of Adjustments to hear you out. And they may say that makes a lot of sense. We understand the hardship and we're going to grant you a variance so you feel allowed to do that. When a variance is granted, it becomes a conforming use. So it does not, the non-conformities chapter wouldn't apply to a property that obtains a variance to allow that, a change in the setback or a change in those provisions. So there are protections built in. I will tell you that from the staff standpoint, with maybe one or two properties accepted, the majority of the changes for the proposed zoning districts should not result in significant changes to any of the uses allowed on existing properties. If you do have a property that the resident or property owner has questions about your specific uses and what's allowed and what's not allowed, contact town staff. We're here to answer all those questions. If we find something that doesn't meet your needs, we'll definitely document that and bring it back to the commission or bring it to the Board of Trustees hear and understand your unique set of circumstances. And the third common question that we've received is, how will this change of zoning classification impact my property taxes? Which is a really great question, and something the town has nothing to do with. Your property taxes are determined by the Laramie County Assessor's Office. The county assessor typically assigns the value, if there's an assessed valuation for your property. The assessed valuation is based on the existing uses and structures on your site. If you have a home on your site and you're using it as a residential home, they're going to value that property of your home based on a similar property values in the area, age of the building, condition of the building. If you open the county tax assessor's records, you'll see condition assessments like good, fair, poor. Those are factors that the assessor uses to assign the assessed valuation to a property. A change of zoning by the town does not automatically change anything on your tax assessor's record. If you have specific questions about changes to your tax assessor's record, you can contact the Laramie County Assessor's Office to get those questions answered, or possibly you may choose to submit an appeal, and that's all through the county, not through the town. So we're trying to answer that question as best we can for individuals that we're asking. So next steps, I appreciate everyone's patience here with me. Tonight is, as we said, a public hearing. It's an opportunity for the planning commission to hear from owners that receive these notices or are impacted by the zone map updates. After the public comments tonight, the planning commission will have an opportunity to provide guidance to the town staff for any recommended changes you'd like to make. Ultimately, the planning commission's recommendation will be forwarded on to the board of trustees for another public hearing. We haven't yet set the date for that public hearing. I'll be presenting a status update to the board of trustees next Tuesday, December 13th. Just kind of informing them of the background, the status, here's what we've done, here's where we're at, so that they're not surprised by seeing the draft map for the first time. But during that time, before we advertise that, staff still wants to hear from property owners. We want to take every opportunity to hear the concerns and answer the questions of owners that are impacted by this process. The board of trustees will conduct their public hearing, and they'll also have an opportunity to refine the map based on public feedback and comments that is in the next planning commission. But before anything can happen, both these boards will have that public hearing, and the board of trustees makes the final decision on adoption of the zone map. We expect that to happen in January or February, and we'll make sure we advertise those dates once we know it. So that's my presentation. I go back to the overview of the map. I know it's still pretty small on the presentation. We tried to zoom in on 4 quadrants of the town to make it a little bit easier to read, but I can already tell from here it's going to be tough on the screen. So we do have the 3 maps up in the room. I'll continue to use the maps on the screen for anyone watching from home. We'll try and zoom in on those as best we can. So that's my presentation, kind of where we've been, why we're doing this, and what the impacts might be for individual property owners. I would turn it back over to the commission. Do you have any questions on process or steps that you'd like to ask of staff? Okay. Chairman, if you're up for it, I would suggest it's time for a public hearing.
I would agree. Nothing else from the board. Okay, at this time, we'll go ahead and open public comments. If anyone wishes to speak on their property or has any questions on the map, feel free to take the podium. Just say your name and your address, if you would, please.
When you're done, please make sure you also sign it on the paper.
Scott Flowers, 8311 6th Street. I've got the letter here. And you were talking about our properties being transitional. And then you were talking about the R4 for residential. You didn't comment anything about 6th Street. The letter states that you guys are trying to push it to C1, which is community commercial. Why are you guys looking at doing our property as community commercial instead of the R4 that, since we've been there since well in the 80s?
And Mr. Flowers, again, we'll take all the public comments, and then if there's, you're not going to probably get feedback from commissioners or staff if they're in this point, because we're collecting the information. But then if there's specific questions, the commission might call you back up to ask some more information.
Okay.
Is there, so I just wanted to kind of share that, and then if you have additional information you'd like to share, this would be a good time to do that.
Okay,
Thank you, sir.
well, I mean, that's the thing, it's just like, we're trying to figure out, basically why you guys are looking at Sixth Street as commercial on the west side of Sixth Street. Also, another question is, you talk about being able to use the permanent structures that are there, nothing affects them as of right now. What happens if one of our structures ends up as being lost in a fire or as such? How are we able to rebuild if we're zoned into a commercial instead of residential? Also, with the loss of our units, you're putting in effect of a lot of our homeowners as far as insurance purposes for our dwellings.
I'm making some notes and I'll be able to speak to many of those questions, and we might call it back up too.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fowler.
Thanks, sir. Anyone else care to come up and publicly comment?
No, my name is Dave Bachman. I'm neighbors with Mr. Flowers. My questions are exactly the same as his. And why are you rezoning this residential area in the first place? What's the main reason? We lived here a long time. And we're not moving, so. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Okay, anyone else there to take the podium? Okay, we probably could have just had you two stay up there then. Maybe give us a minute just to kind of organize the notes. But most definitely, we'll call you guys back up and we can talk through this. Okay, thank you for your patience. At this time, if there are no any other comments, we'll just go ahead and close public hearing. Mr. Bird.
As I said, I was taking a few notes, and I can absolutely speak to some of those questions that came up. So I can do that. I also don't believe I can zoom in. Oh, I can. Here we go. See if I can get a little bit closer just to the area where those two comments were coming from.
Yeah, the quadrant map.
Yeah, I'm gonna cycle through a new page and try and zoom in again. I think it's about as close as I can get on the screen. But as I understood, from Mr. Flowers and Mr. Was it Brockman?
Bachman, yeah,
Bachman?
been around a long time.
Did I say that correctly? Bachman?
Bachman, B-O-C-K-M-A-N.
Okay, thank
They
you.
made the street after before Collins.
Thank you. I just.
Been here for ages, way longer than this count's been here.
Well, for that reason, I wanted to make sure I got your name right.
Yeah.
Screw that up.
So, going through the couple questions, the Sixth Street, the west side of Sixth Street. I'll take a stab at this. I know the planning commission had some specific dialogue and discussion about this corridor. But as you can see on our map here, this area that's identified in red is an area that's currently identified as a possible change to C1 community commercial as a commercial zone district. Across the street, you have business uses, including Creative Kids Corner, Napa Auto Parts, Subway, Kimpton Liquors, banks, Shell gas station. This is already a commercial corridor. You have the schools to the north, and you have a large open area that's intended to be identified as potential future commercial development. So as I recall, the conversations from those prior meetings was primarily looking at. You have a number of properties, I keep trying to use the cursor, you can't see it, but along that corridor. You have a number of properties that already have commercial uses on them. A number of those properties on the west side of Sixth Street are already zoned transitional. And the transitional zone district is a commercial zone district. It just doesn't provide a lot of certainty as to what types of commercial uses might get approval. And the direction we heard during the land use code and work sessions for the zone map was, let's pick a zone district that makes sense, that everyone can understand what those uses are allowed and what it's intended to become.
When was it zone transitional?
And Mr. Flowers, if you don't mind, just so we can hear you, if you want to come back up to the microphone so we can capture that question. If that's all right, Chairman, I think that was it.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
Okay, thank you.
Preempting it.
When was it zone transitional along that corridor?
Great question. So the town many years ago was operating under an open zone district category under Larimer County. And in about 2007, the town determined that wasn't meeting the needs, it wasn't serving the community purpose that it once had. And in 2007, the town of Wellington adopted a model land use code created by the Department of Local Affairs for the state. That model land use code was from what I can tell, I wasn't here at the time, but from the research that I had done, what I found was that the town had pretty much adopted that model code and made very few revisions to it. That model code included a transitional zone district that was similar to what was adopted by the town in 2007. And it was identified as a kind of transitional, for lack of a better word, an area that has a mix of uses that was moving in one direction. And so being along a major roadway, I think the town at the time decided that the transitional zone district made sense. There were already some commercial uses. Let's allow it to continue to include those commercial uses. So in the current process that we're undergoing, there are a number of homes along that stretch that have already been converted to commercial uses, including the remind me the name of the not the chiropractor, the therapy services. I can't remember. Yes, I can't remember the name of the business, but there's a sign there that has a number of businesses on it for operating as commercial use under the transitional zone district. And they had expressed that they wanted to keep that and maintain that character. You also have the town's property, the public works shop and the bulk water station that are more of a commercial nature. So as I recall the conversations with the planning commission in working through this, that area being fronting a major roadway made sense to allow those commercial uses to come in over time. And the C1 zone district is more of a lighter intensity commercial use than a C3 that allows more automobile oriented businesses with large parking lots and drive-throughs, and it's certainly not a light industrial area. So the C1 was kind of the lowest commercial category that would be most compatible with the commercial corridor of Sixth Street and also blended into the existing residential properties to the west. So that's what I recall, and if there's other comment, then certainly offer the planning commission can respond as well.
I think the only other thing I remember was, identifying Sixth Street with the industrial zone, the bonfire subdivision, more development potentially coming to the north, that eventually Sixth Street would just become a commercial corridor to lead to more commercial development that's going to eventually take place north of town. So it wasn't by any means to overlooking the existing residentials. It's just in the grand scheme of things, as we zone and update zoning code, your corridor just happens to be most likely transitioning to a commercial over time, naturally, just as lots fill in and as businesses fill in that north side.
Okay, as a homeowner though, if I decide to sell, how are you wanting me to sell? Because you're gonna limit me on my property on who I sell to and who I don't sell to.
So if you would,
Yeah, I can certainly speak to that. So a change of ownership doesn't change the use. So if your property is a residential home on a property that is, if it becomes zone C1, you could advertise that for sale when you're ready to sell it. You can advertise it as the residential use that's existing. Change of ownership doesn't affect the use. You could also market it as a commercial property. If you think you can fetch a higher price for the commercial zoning, you have the opportunity to advertise it for both of those categories.
Yeah, of course.
And I just, I agree with everything that they said, and we had a lot of discussion about this, but what I think is also important to point out is we didn't just look at these maps and just kind of decide what we thought it should be. We literally all drove through the entire town, through all of these properties and really actually looked at them and considered them in the use that they were in, but the surrounding area and all of that kind of thing. So none of this was done to try to make your life more difficult. And one of the things that won me over, because it is troubling when you're trying to rezone things and it's a residence, right? And anything near the downtown core makes it a little bit difficult, was the fact that it doesn't change your use. You still have protections and you have the opportunity when you want to sell it. It's actually better than if it was just one thing, right? And so it doesn't limit you. It keeps all your options open. And I think that that's a really important thing. And I would like for you to clarify, because you did bring up about if there were a fire or something, what happens with that? Because Lord knows I wrote this thing and used to go 1,000 times, but if you could just refresh my memory, that would be great.
Absolutely. Yeah, I still have a couple other questions that you brought up that I didn't want to forget about. That's a good segue. So if a structure is damaged, there's provisions in Article 7 of the Land Use Code that protect that as well. And I printed that out so I can speak directly to this because there's specific language on that. And I'm sorry, I was flipping to the right page here because I was going to read a portion of it exactly verbatim from the code. So on a non-conforming building or structure, a non-conforming structure may be used for any use allowed in the underlying zone district, including a legal non-conforming use. It includes maintenance or minor repair of that structure as being permitted, and provided that the minor repair does not extend or expand the non-conforming structure. And then for enlargement or expansion, non-conforming structure in which only permitted uses are operated. So if you have structures that are legally existing today and continuing to use them, that structure can be enlarged or expanded as long as the enlargement or expansion is in compliance with all the other provisions of the code for those similar structures in the district. The enlargement or expansion shall be subject to other applicable town ordinances. So you'll have to comply with the building code and everything else
But
for.
if you put me at commercial, then what are you, I mean, the thing is right there. If I have to do a complete rebuild on my house because I lose it. Right there, and you sit there and you put my property as commercial. Right there, the town can sit there and say, you're axed, you can't have a residential.
And that's not true, but I'll read you a different section. For damage or destruction, if the structure in which a non-conforming use is housed, operated, or maintained is destroyed by any means, to an extent of more than 50%, then it can't be reestablished except in compliance with the zone district regulations. So if your home is destroyed, you may have to meet the setbacks. You may have to meet those other categories. But it's not to say that you can't rebuild your home. If the structure is damaged less than 50%, then you're allowed to rebuild, reconstruct, and bring it back up to a habitable standard, as long as you don't use the damage to then also expand or enlarge the structure beyond what it was originally. So there are some protections in this for the exact scenario that you're describing. But there's also some limitations that you can't use those unfortunate events to change it into something that it wasn't before. So if you have,
But if I'm residential. And I lose my home, I should be able to redesign and redo the footprint of my home. That's not saying I can't. That is saying that if I'm 50% or more, I have to comply with the new zoning, which is commercial.
This might be, so maybe, because we had this discussion the other day regarding another subject about the actual zoning of the parcel and the use of the parcel. They're actually different because, and correct me if I'm wrong, were the house to be this gentleman's residence were to burn down, he is not required, he can build a residence, he doesn't have to turn it to commercial because that's just what the underlying zoning is. Am I saying that correctly? If I captured that correctly? The use is different than the zoning. In this instance,
Sort of I think that Mr. Flowers is identifying that if the structure was damaged, maybe beyond repair. In which case the zoning does define the uses. So I hear what you're saying. And there's specific provisions built into the code for how to handle that. The C2 zone district, which was not what was proposed for your property, the C2 was primarily Cleveland Avenue. Has specific provisions that residential uses lawfully existing in that category. If they're damaged or destroyed, they're allowed to be rebuilt. Same is true for religious land uses in C2. That specific provision does not exist for C1, but you would still have the other protection built into the code, which is to come back and ask for a variance to rebuild the residential, even though the use might not be allowed under the C1 zoning. So there's a different type of protection in that particular circumstance, but there's still an avenue to pursue that path.
And I'd also add that the Board of Adjustments that you would go to seek the variance are also volunteers. It's not a town board. It's a unit of the town government, but it's a volunteer board of fellow Wellington citizens. I can't fathom an instance where if you were to lose a home and a step before the Board of Adjustments, that they would not grant you a variance to rebuild your residence. I understand the skepticism, I do, but wow, that's taking it to another level. I mean,
Yeah, because I mean, there's been a lot of things that.
understood, believe me,
Okay,
I've
we'll
understood.
leave it at that, but
Yep.
my thing is that you've got a whole block right there, just north of the Lopen Jug to your guys' town shop. That has got older homes on it that has been residential. It's been residential since it's been built. I understand that you have some property there, you know, there's been a few of the guys that had their body shop there or an upholstery shop, he's moved out, he's gone. There's been a couple others that have businesses there, they're gone. But our primary thing is that we're residential there. And for us to sit there and swallow this to try to go to commercial, I mean, you guys are putting some shackles on us. I mean, we still don't have 100% exact answer on if I lose my house 100%, if I have to sit there and comply with a commercial zoning site.
Scott, I just wanted to, I'm Linda Knapp, and your family's been a part of this community for many, many years, longer than I have.
Yeah.
You know, and just knowing your property and everything over there. And this was a hard thing for me too, just because I looked at the people that, you know, wait, they've lived there forever, they've lived there, how can we rezone this? You know, and it really did come back to going, you know, it's also basically what I was feeling, and I think we as a board agreed that we were actually opening up more options to say, you know, and the feedback we also got from the other side of, okay, we're okay at having it zoned commercial because now it gives us more of an option of selling. We can still keep that residential. You know what, maybe we can sell it commercial. And some of those, you know, that was the other piece of it. So this was a hard decision, and I just want you to know that I'm hearing exactly what you're saying. I do lie with Eric a little bit on the variance. And if that came to be, you know, you would have my word that I would be coming to the variance. I would speak, you know, on behalf of the residents that have that, you know, a tragedy. I mean, we're talking a tragedy. But, you know, if you were to say, you know, and I don't know if I ever would, it's a family home that you've had forever and ever and ever. And, you know, I understand that passion, but if you did come, say, you know, we want to sell it, but we want to sell it as a home, you could still do that. So, you know, we are looking at the God forbid tragedy of that. And that's kind of where we lied
So why
away on that, to make that giving more of an option for those residents. And so we've been kind of back and forth, being that there are commercial places there in transitional resident area too. So,
So why can't you do the opposite? Why can't you leave it residential? And if I decide to sell it to somebody that wants to do an office out of it, why can't we come before you to have it rezoned then? Because obviously there's already that option along that corridor.
right, and I'll let kind of Eric speak of it, I think we could, but I also think on the, that we're trying to weigh of going, what's the right answer? And so you coming up and speaking is very valuable.
Well, I get it. I mean, I know that the town's growing, and it's
Yeah.
growing more south than it is north. And I understand that there's, commercial going north. But the thing is, where we're at, there's possibly no other building there. I mean, we're full.
Right.
Right. I'll just reiterate the giant draft that's across the plan here, so that. What you're doing right now is the whole point of it, so yeah,
It is.
we'll bear through discussion, but by no means nothing has been. We're not stamping a C1 on that thing tonight, if this discussion continues. And that's something that we need to look further at, so.
Mr. Bachman, what was your address again?
8317, I'm next door neighbor
Okay.
to Mr. Scott,
Got it.
and I agree with everything he said.
Right.
I've been there a long time too as well, and point of interest to everybody here. The 18-wheelers are eating up our street on 6th Street. They're gonna tear it completely down because they're coming from Al Canyon and they're cutting across the Shorty down to Wellington. And they go right through. I see them all the time. And they're gonna tear up the street with that 80-some thousand pounds of cargo on the back end.
Whole nother conversation.
Well, somebody needs to adhere to that because they're gonna have to rebuild the road if they don't keep continuing. And there's not enough stoplights because no one stops up by the little daycare up there. And the sheriff's up there 3 or 4 times a day to giving out tickets on account of it.
Sure.
And somebody's gonna get killed out there because they don't stop, they don't pay attention. They got a cell phone growing out their nose.
Commissioner
You want the
Moyer,
truth? There's the truth.
that's how you reach for your mic.
Yes, and forgive me because I understand that I may be opening up the can of worms, but Cody, when you mentioned that there are provisions within, I think you said C3 or C2 that do protect in the case of catastrophic loss. Is there a reason, or could you explain to me, because I wasn't a part of this conversation, what the reasoning was for not having the same provisions in C1? And well, I guess that's question number 1. And number 2 is, knowing that this document has already been adopted, would that be even a possibility to amend it in that way?
So the document you're referring to is the land use code, not the map that's being discussed tonight. But as I recall, many of the commissioners involved in the land use code process feel free to jump into. But with regards to the C2 zone district, and C2 is primarily the Cleveland corridor. There were 2 points of discussion there, and that was that at one point in time, residential uses were an allowed use on Cleveland, but this still allows the mixed use commercial. And so that was part of the question for if those existing or future mixed use commercial developments have residential components to it, how do you resolve that if those are damaged or destroyed? And so that was one of those conclusions to make sure that they could still be allowed to rebuild. And specifically, the religious land uses came up as well. That most of our zoning district categories allow assembly uses and religious land uses. Most of our residential zone district allow religious land uses because it's not the government's role to say what you can practice in your own home, or if you want to invite someone over to practice or worship with you. That's not the government's role. But it was very clear that any new religious land use in the C2 Cleveland corridor didn't make sense because of the need for parking, the character and nature of that corridor being primarily restaurants, entertainment establishments, and et cetera. It wasn't the right fit is what everyone determined, but there was a real desire to allow those existing uses that if they choose, if those structures were damaged or destroyed, that they wouldn't have to then be out of the use established on that for which land uses. So those two components were really specific to the C2 category. To Commissioner Warrior's question, can the code be amended? Absolutely. There's a process to amend the code. We can go back and we can, sharpen the pencil and put a finer point to some of those topics. Generally speaking, and probably to Mr. Flowers' concern, typically when you define a set of uses for a zone district, anything that's not listed as a permitted use in that zoning district is generally not something you want to allow to perpetuate. And that's the way the code is kind of set up, is to identify, these are the uses that are identified for this zone district. And so if something is removed voluntarily or involuntarily, that you don't just turn around and say, hang the code, go back to what it was before. But there are specific provisions in place to address the maintenance, the ongoing repairs for structures, enlargement and expansion of those structures, even protecting the uses. And down to if it's damaged to less than 50%, you can rebuild it. If it's more than 50%, you may not be able to, but you can obtain a variance if the Board of Adjustment says, yes, you can do that. So very valid concern that you've brought up, and that's kind of the explanation as to why the codes are set up the way that they are. And so certainly I understand where you're coming from.
But you gotta look out for us residents there. I mean, you just said it again, more than 50%. We have to abide by the new zoning. It's, I'm not believing it. I mean, it's just like, we've got to, we gotta protect our property, and that's, I just feel like if you're doing, and I guess, like I said earlier today, this evening, you said an R4 or whatever that was, the residential 4. Why can't we have that block? Is that?
That's actually my question. I guess specifically, I can't tell from the map because I think those lines disappeared, the individual lot lines.
They did on the new draft.
So do these properties abut R4?
They do. I'm going to share the county assessor's map just because I can show you a little more detail.
I assume, Scott, you're not opposed to just being grouped in with the R4 downtown neighborhood zoning. That issues you all the protection of a residential lot.
Correct. I mean, if we can keep it as residential, it's where I'm trying to go. And be able to have the option if I sell, because if I sell, you're gonna have to have all the rest of the 3 lots be able to sell to do any more commercial.
I have a question. These are zone transitional right now.
Right now, they are.
How many of those are being used in commercial use that are being zoned C1? That are transitional versus what he's asking?
On our block, there's 1, and it's to the north of me. He's using it as an office, the house. That's it. So between Garfield and Hayes or Harrison, is it Harrison?
Harrison.
There's one clear in the end of the south, though.
Yeah, but there's one more.
That's what I'm talking about. The generator guy, he's using it as an office. That's the only one that's commercial on our whole block.
What about the one that's the therapy center? Is that already zoned C1?
That's north, though.
That's a little further north. That's
So the same block.
Right, but does he say block?
Next block. The next.
Oh,
Next block, north.
yeah,
It's north of the stop.
they're at Hayes.
right, but it's
no, they're
still
right
along the
across the
sixth corner,
Yeah.
corner is the question.
Yeah.
So along that
Same
strip.
block.
Right, but it's still that same strip, which is why I'm asking. So my question is. Because one of the things that was pointed out is you have to have some consistency. There's another area that we were going through this with a lot of transitionals as well. And so like. There's a balance there, right? Like. I want to give you exactly what you want, because if I were in your shoes, I would feel the same way, right? At the same time. You can't. Spot zoning is illegal. Right, so I can't just take your house and make it the way you want it.
That's why I'm asking.
It's a long
to make it
story
the
why
way that
that's
it is. I mean, I've got three houses there.
Because he already adjoins the R4, we're not spot zoning anything. All we're doing is moving the R4 line to basically loop over and include these properties. So there's-
And not include any others, just there too.
No, all of those.
is what I'm understanding.
These two gentlemen bothered to come to the meeting and make their opinions heard, so I don't want to take any assumptions on property owners that didn't show up.
Right, but if you told me that you were zoning me C1 and I was okay with it, why would I show up?
Well, we had, earlier on in this process, we did veer from something that we assumed that we thought should go one way,
Right.
and we're led to believe by Mr. Bird here that he had gotten comment about adamantly, those homeowners adamantly not wanting to be zoned, and we changed it early in the process. So this is not, you know, it's not new territory here. We've already done it once.
I'm not arguing that, I'm just trying to understand what properties is gonna be impacted because those people that aren't here, that if they're gonna be impacted. And maybe we're okay with the letter, wouldn't show up to say, I'm okay with this, right? People don't do that. They show up when they're not okay.
Mr. Bird?
So what would be the process there, is my question.
I'm gonna provide some context because I know that the scale of the draft map that we had is hard to zoom in on individual properties, so on the monitors. And I also recognize that those are hard to see. But the block that's kind of in question here along 6th Street from Harrison. I'm looking at from Harrison up to. I think it's Grand. Yeah. So along that corridor, the west side of 6th Street, along between Grant and Harrison, you have a commercial property, residential property, commercial property, residential property, residential properties, commercial properties. So you have a pattern, an alternating pattern of some of those uses are already commercial, some of those uses are remaining residential. There's not consistency there. I do recall that was one of the topics of conversation was for long range planning purposes, how do you create some consistency and expectations for what might happen along that corridor? And that's, I think, where the C1 came in as being an option. But specific to Mr. Flowers and Mr. Bachman, I'm zooming on the block now. This is Harrison on the south. So you've got the loaf and jug, you've got a business use. And then you have Mr. Flowers and Mr. Bachman. I don't know the next neighbor north of Mr.
I
Bachman.
do, that's Chris, he's in the military,
Okay, thank
yeah,
you.
he's in the reserves up there.
And then you got a neighbor to us in there
We got a neighbor on the other side too.
on the west, right behind. So if you come back down directly behind the Lopen Jug, that first property that was commercial,
Mhm.
that property split and the house to the west is residential also.
Okay. Thanks for that context. So that's the block in question. And the way the draft zoning map was prepared, the properties west of the alley were identified as R4. And the properties east of the alley were identified with adjacency to 6th Street were identified as C1. So I'm hearing kind of two different trains of thought, and you've certainly heard from Mr. Flowers and Mr. Bachman. I think it would be largely up to the commission to consider how you want to take a look at this specific block. I have not heard from Chris, I didn't catch his last name.
Yeah, he's in the airports up there, he's probably on duty right now.
So we haven't heard from that landowner that might also be impacted in this particular block.
Okay,
Cause you also got a joint, I mean, you got a shared alley there. I mean, how in the world, even if I was in the R4 and my house is on 5th Street. I wouldn't want to share my alley with a commercial.
No.
I mean, we got enough traffic as it is going through there because people use it as a shortcut, but.
go ahead.
I mean, all we're here to do is to ask you guys, seriously think about it,
Yeah.
Especially with that area right there, I mean.
Put some quiet signs
I
on
live
6th
not
Street.
too far
too.
from you, so I
16.
understand.
And I'm saying, it's just like, you've got to have all three of us on board in order to turn that in. If one guy wants to sell commercial, unless you're gonna leave an office building there. There's no way that somebody's gonna be able to sell one lot as commercial and have somebody else go in there.
think this is
depending on what they want.
a much less resistant path to just alter the zone lines. As opposed to going back and trying to alter the land use code that's already adopted. As opposed to, I mean, at the root of the problem is the protections, and if your house is burned down, you want to be able to rebuild your house, totally understandable. Versus, instead of going back and trying to include some of the same protections that C2 has in the C1. I feel like the path of least lesser resistance would be to just include these into the R4 neighborhood. Does everybody basically agree with that? I agree. We don't need to go back and alter
You
anything
know,
that's
that
already had.
conversation with the other landowners who aren't here to know we're trying to change our mind.
You got 2 out of 3 of us here.
You're talking about just those 3 properties.
And I-
None of the rest.
Yeah, no, nobody else has expressed interest in changing theirs, so.
And so if Mr. Chris, Air Force fan, does he not have to be
He's in
informed?
compliance with,
No, I'm saying,
yeah, he is.
well, he's not here to say that.
She's up in Cheyenne.
My concern, what if you're him and you
Protecting
wanted to
you.
be C1? I have a son in the military.
The
so I
thing is-
respect-
Yeah, I'm a military trainer, too.
Order, please, guys. I don't want to start speaking for members of the community that aren't here, so I think we should focus on the 2 gentlemen that are here and have made it to express their opinion.
So, I mean, the whole idea of changing, rewriting the C2 or the C1, the impacts of that that's a major change. I would suggest that, you know, as you suggested, maybe putting these as R4 instead of C1, and maybe there's a conversation where Mr. Bird can reach out to this other individual and see if this is also confirmed that is that individual's wishes as well. Maybe all 3 of those then become that, but I wouldn't wish to act without understanding exactly what that homeowner wishes to do. That's my opinion. I think that may be what others are saying as well.
I want to look at the map. I mean, I did look at the map and looked at it many times. I will also say that those 3, it's 3 houses, or it's 4 houses. But it's 3 that are currently the R4. Are really the only ones that are transitional, sorry, that do have the alley. And I'm gonna agree with that point of it being an alley access there too. And I don't have any problems with those properties.
I would just reiterate what Tim said, which is what I was trying to say, is that if we're changing from what we sent the letters out to these homeowners, these property owners, I just want to make sure that we're not changing something without them knowing that we're now changing our mind on what that should be zoned, because we're not rezoning, we're rezoning it to something different than what we said we were rezoning it to, because these are transitioning properties.
But they'll receive another letter before the Board of Trustees would vote to. So they will
Are we
be
not
alerted.
then eliminating this opportunity for them?
They've had it.
They've got a lot of opportunities.
I disagree, and I think when you change your mind, they need to have ample opportunity to speak their mind.
Mr. Bird, could this be handled administratively? Is it feasible that we could recommend an approval of the map pending these 2 or 3 properties? Would you be able to get in touch with the homeowner if he's interested in discussing it? And then can this change be made administratively without coming back to the planning commission? If it's a simple, these 3 gentlemen or these 3 property owners prefer this remain R4 residential. Or does that need to come back for an entire public hearing session again?
I don't know your name, but I don't understand what the whole fuss, I mean, why you're getting mad about.
I'm not mad about, I'm not mad. Here's the thing. I want you to be R4. I have no issue with that. My issue is if you weren't here because you were okay with it being
And
C1,
you know what, I'd go right to my neighbor, high five him and say, good job.
but what
Because
if,
he came here to fight.
right, but what if that person
He's got the
wants to
option,
be C1?
but he's got the option when he sells to go back to commercial. Everybody does. If
Not
I-
if it's R4.
Yes, you do, because I can come right to the town board.
Request the zone change.
Right, but that
That's-
isn't guaranteed any more than a board of adjustment would be guarantee a variance to rebuild your
I
house.
am not comfortable with these hypotheticals. We keep going.
That's what I'm saying.
Respectfully, Lisa, I do have to make kind of a point that as we are a board and commissioners that come together, there's so many times that we do bring things up for public comment and everything. And we don't get 10,000 people in this room.
I understand.
We get 3 to 5 and decisions are made for 3 to 5 public comment that come up versus the 10,000, because we have to kind of make some decisions based on, you know, and at this point, we are 2 to 3, you know, homes. So I'm too feeling a little confused as to why we're kind of at a holdout right now.
Well, let me explain, and maybe just kind of hear what I'm saying. I don't have a problem switching from going transitional to C1 to transitional to R4. That is, I'm totally okay with that. My hesitation is in doing it tonight and approving and recommending this when we send out letters to the 3 properties we're speaking about, informing 3 property owners of our intention of rezoning from transitional to commercial. And 2 came and spoke up and gave very valid arguments, and I'm not arguing that. I'm not okay with what you want. My concern is the 3rd person who isn't in this room was sent a letter saying we're changing you from transitional to commercial. And he chose not to be here or couldn't be here or whatever reason, he's not here.
Okay,
Wait, let me finish my sentence so then you can fully understand where I'm coming from. And if we approve this. And his property, instead of what the letter's saying, which I don't know what the legalities are behind us informing people. But instead of his property being recommended to be C1, he's gonna find out that we recommended it to be R4. Without any notification to him of our change. That is my concern.
okay. Same situation then. I got a letter. What if I didn't show up today? It would still go from what it is now to C1. Correct? Am I wrong?
If you didn't show up to the public comment to contest it, most likely it would have gone to.
But the letter said it was going C1, the planning draft said it was going C1. So your
That's the only
expectation,
notification I got was a letter.
but your expectation, if you didn't show up, is that it was going to C1 and there was nothing you could do about it.
Okay,
So that guy, he's not here, so his expectation is, it's going to C1 and there's nothing he can do about it. And now it's gonna go to R4, something he wasn't told about at all. That is where I'm stuck.
I'm hearing what Commissioner, Lisa,
Chalet.
I need to read the same text.
I know.
I hear what Commissioner Chalet is saying. Your fear is that there might be a perception of a bait and switch if something wasn't.
It's fine with the R4. That is not my hesitation. My hesitation is changing tonight and approving without notification.
More of a legal issue.
I hear what you're saying, and I tend to agree with that. I think there's a way to work through this. What I'm hearing tonight is that Mr. Flowers and Mr. Bachman that live along 6th Street between Garfield and Harrison have requested consideration for the R4 zone category, and I've heard a general willingness by the planning commission to consider that as a recommendation. But perhaps there's a need to communicate with Chris, with his last name, what's the other residential property in that block. I would be happy to send a specific letter directly to that homeowner and try to reach them. I'm sure that Mr. Flowers and Mr. Bachman will help staff in trying to make that contact and communicate that. To have a better understanding of what that individual property or desires for their specific property. So if it is the commission's direction, it's certainly would be feasible. I'm sorry with the Zoom, trying to get it dialed in here. It seems to me that the current zoning of these 2 smaller properties on the south end of the block that are fronting Harrison are already zoned C1. There's no proposed change there. The The next three properties are currently residential uses, zoned transitional. We can draw that line at the north end of Mr. Bachman's property tonight, if that's the commission's desire. And we'll find out from the north property owner what their desire is, and we can change that line if that's their desire.
We as in staff. So this does not have to come back for another formal public hearing. To repeat the process for one property.
Well, I will ask the commission. I am happy to take those steps to make communication with the property owner that isn't here tonight, that's in the same line. We can certainly have that discussion at a staff level, and I'm sure that Mr. Flowers and Mr. Bachman will help us with that. The question back to the commission would be, this is your opportunity to make an official recommendation to the Board of Trustees. So as part of your official recommendation, if all three of these property owners desire R4, is that your recommendation?
Well, we have two property owners here right now. So, I mean, would the recommendation be to zone this to R4, change this for the two property owners here, and then conditionally based on what to do as administrative, or based on what actual direct input from the third property owner, so there's complete clarity there. I mean, is that a reasonable approach on this?
I'm fine with that. What I heard was if staff is able to communicate with this third owner in this block, and that owner says, yes, R4 makes sense for me, then we would forward the recommendation to the Board of Trustees showing these three residential properties as R4. Is
That makes
what it
sense.
is?
I mean, it does make sense. These guys have to come back to another planning commission meeting for the same thing.
Or to rehash this entire thing over one property that is basically their pending homeowner, or sorry, property owner approval. Yeah,
Mhm.
makes perfect sense.
And-
Your debt. I don't remember.
Can I also ask a clarifying question on this topic? If staff can make contact with this third property owner and they say, I like C1 commercial, I don't know if that's the case or not, but if they said, I want to keep C1, does that change the commission's recommendation, or would you have staff zone the two properties for Mr. Flowers and Mr. Bachman R4 and leave this third one as C1?
The next adjoining property north of it is C1, correct?
It's recommended to be C1.
If the property owner wants to do R4, then let's let him do R4. If he has no opinion or says C1 is fine with me, assuming I have no idea what he's gonna say, then it's all, the letter's already gone out. We've obliged legally his notification. It should go to C1.
Does everyone agree with that?
So the third property owner, that's what you're talking about. So
Yes.
if he wants to stay C1, he can stay C1.
Absolutely.
If he wants to go R4, he can go
We're not
R4.
spot zoning anything. We're not creating giant gaps between R4 and C1. He's that border property. So if he
Right.
wants to go commercial, he will join in with the properties to the north. If he wants to go residential, he'll add on to the property line of these two joint.
The zoning of these two, yes,
Yeah, the zone.
sounds reasonable to me. I'm supportive.
Okay, I feel like staff has clear direction to do that piece.
Awesome.
Did we, I was just going back and Mr. Flowers, you've been a great sport.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank
the
you.
whole time. Thank you for doing that. The other question that I had written down.
Go ahead, Mr. Gerber. Get the question out of the way.
Take it to Dad's place.
Mr. Flowers, the other question that I had noted that you'd asked during public comment was insurance impacts. And it seems like maybe that question gets somewhat resolved based on the direction we just heard from the planning commission. But I also think it's a valuable question to ask and get answered too. So as I understood, your concern was if you live in a residential structure and it's insured residentially but zoned commercially, what happens if something were to happen? Is your insurance going to cover it? Check your insurance policies. Most of your insurance policies recover or cover replacement for like, but there's often a disclosure there that you have to comply with applicable town zoning codes. or setbacks and other things.
I've already talked to him about it, and that's why I brought up, but the thing is if you go commercial on me. I mean. I can't have insurance technically as residential. If something happens.
There's something.
Yeah, and I'm not an insurance expert, so I can't speak to that directly. I'm glad that you're already speaking with your insurance provider. But non-conforming status structures exist all over the country and they're still insured. So I don't know that there's probably not a black and white line to be drawn that we just can't insure it. It might be insured differently, or the value that they put on it might be different than like replacement cost for a commercial structure as opposed to a residential structure. But certainly this situation is not unique to Wellington. It exists all over the country, hundreds of thousands of times. I'm sure the insurance companies have found a way to address that, but for your specific circumstances, talk to your specific insurer.
Would you mind restating your address real quick, just for purposes when we go to move to approve or continue this? I think it'll be helpful that we can specifically call out your two properties.
8311 6th Street.
8311,
And Bachman say 317.
8317. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
I'll talk to Chris when he gets home.
There are the two houses right in the middle.
This makes sense. It's not any major overhaul to move the zoning lines to properties when you've got such adamant, opinions about what they should be. Makes total sense to me.
Well, I'm also protecting our neighbors to the west. I mean, we've got an alley that you turn that into commercial, boy.
Yeah, it's pretty bad right now.
They got that stuff, I mean, as it is, it's the highway where people kind of avoiding 6th Street to go to the liquor store and back.
Well, I just want to thank you for showing up and again, your patience and making us aware of what your opinion is. And, again, this would have gone a different way, but you came up and spoke, both you gentlemen came and spoke. And I think this is what this is why we're here. We don't just rubber stamp by this stuff. So, when you engage, this whole process has been a lot of public comment. So I think you came at the right time. And I think, do you believe are you satisfied with the outcome currently?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I am, and, I'm glad, thank you guys for, listening to our concerns about it, and, hopefully we can push it to.
And I just want to say, I apologize if it sounded like I was trying to be opposed to what you wanted. I just think it's important I feel like it's my job to protect that third person's property rights of having a say and knowing, like he said, the bait and switch. I just didn't want that to happen.
No, I
Not that I
understand,
was
but that's
opposed.
what I'm here to, is to protect my neighbors also.
Right. Unfortunately, the only property I can consider when you're talking is your property, right?
Exactly.
And so I think that this is the perfect resolution, and I'm really glad that it worked out for you guys and we're able to give your neighbor a chance to say what he wants as well. So thanks for coming in, it's important.
I think it was a good meeting, actually. I've never been to one of them.
Lively, it's not usually this.
Well, we've been lived that on this property a long time,
Neighbor.
that kind of thing, so we felt like we were getting stepped on. That's not,
No, you both did it the right way. Thank you. for coming.
well,
Yeah.
the right way to do that. Thank you.
Okay, I think you're,
I'll talk to Chris when he gets home.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, States and.
And we appreciate you helping with the
Yeah.
communications.
Yeah, he's one of us too. So.
Oh, good. Well, please stay in touch with him and stay in touch with town staff.
Oh, sure, no
also, so we
problem.
can continue those conversations.
We can do it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
okay. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything public hearing wise. I think it's been closed. We've kind of come to the decision here. So are we prepared to move on the recommendation for the zoning map?
I do have one other specific individual that reached out to town staff, and I encouraged him to come tonight, but he made it clear he has issues with mobility and he's a caregiver to make it to tonight's meeting. I didn't receive a letter from him, although I did ask for it. Knowing that he still has another opportunity to come and speak at the board of trustees meeting as well. The property is immediately behind Papa's Table on the corner of Harrison and Second Street. The property is currently zoned transitional and there's a residential use on that site. There's actually the opposite conversation of what we just discussed tonight. But the owner of that property, made it very clear to me, as a town staff, that he did not want that property to change to R4 zoning. That he wanted to keep the C2. I'm sorry, not to keep, but it's currently zoned commercial as a transitional zone district, and he wanted to keep it, or excuse me, make it C2 compatible with the C2 uses along Cleveland Avenue. So that's at 3731 Harrison, was that individual property owner. I continue to reach out to him, but his specific request of staff was to present to the planning commission tonight that he would like to have that zone C2 to be compatible with the Cleveland corridor. So I wanted to share that on his behalf. I'll continue to reach out to him and encourage him to attend the future public hearings.
There's several lots there, is it just the first one?
It's one ownership lot. It's has
Five of those for all of those?
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is it was platted at one point on the original town plat as multiple store frontages on both sides of Second Street. I've not heard from the west side of Second Street. But that was exactly what this particular property owner had indicated was they bought this property years ago for a commercial investment property because it had platted storefronts and adjacent to the downtown. And so that was his specific request, was to keep a commercial zoning, and C2 made sense for him. So but it's quite the opposite scenario that we heard from Mr. Flowers and Mr. Bachman tonight.
It's C2 on Third Street, well, obviously it's the town is there, right?
The town property on the other end of the block is currently zone C, or we're proposing is on it C2 compatible with the Cleveland corridor.
So is it unreasonable then to leave that property C2?
I don't think
Or
it
make
would
it
change.
C2?
Yeah.
I don't think it's unreasonable.
No, I'm fine.
What's-
It's-
On the south side, Old Polish now barber shop that has Second Street frontage,
So on Second Street,
similar.
Yeah.
so on the draft zoning map, south of Cleveland on the same as Side Street Second.
Yeah.
South of the alley is the barber shop, and then there's a commercial building. Forget the name of the business at 8133. But both of those were identified to be C2 compatible with the Cleveland commercial corridor, but the residential houses south of there were identified to be R4.
For the same reasons, then I don't think it makes sense to deny somebody a specific request when it makes sense.
No.
And there's already precedent there on both sides of Cleveland that's been done before.
Do you have the address for that?
It's 3731 Harrison.
I think that would make sense too. I mean,
If you're going to do this, you need to notify the surrounding, well, there's no public comment,
Oh.
yeah.
Of course, Melissa, feel free to come.
Make sure you sign it.
I apologize for that. Melissa Whitehouse, 3922 Grant Avenue. From what you're discussing right now, which is different than what you were discussing before, now you're talking about the possibility of changing from the map that's been published and the letters that you've already sent out, that it's going to be R4. So the neighbors surrounding those two properties, as we're just discussing, how do they get notified that, oh, not according to the original letter, my neighbors are, and this notification to the board packet. Now I'm going to be adjacent to the C2, not an R4. How do those residents get notified? Thank you.
That's a great comment. Can we? If you reach out to the owner. And could that be something that we could bring back to the board? To rezone that later? Or does it make more sense to try to do it now? We're trying to get at least most of this zoning map to go through. I mean, what would be the better option? I hear what Melissa's saying too.
Came back.
Yeah.
I mean, we go back.
Approve it.
Huh?
Came back to us with a variance to approve it.
We have been
Or
working on
is some
this
change
since-
request?
That's zone change, yeah.
Any published map also, I will just add is draft, so there's no legally binding status on the maps. The letter is a good point, though. That's solid.
We've been working on this since August of 21 and had many, public comments, especially with that Roosevelt.
Why is that different than the last one?
The letter aspect, I don't think is, we'd have to go back and re-notify the properties surrounding, if they'd already been notified they were getting a C1
Yeah.
change, you'd have to go back and resend the letters with the change, correct?
Letters saying what other people were doing?
Well, in this case, what I'm hearing is that the prior scenario on Sixth Street was they were advertised on the draft zoning map as being a commercial use. And the request we heard tonight was to downzone them to a more protected, fewer uses residential zone district. And so most likely the adjacent owners would not object to uses that are already allowed in the same zone district. And compatible and a neighbor to them. I think the question that came up regarding this property is it was shown on the draft map as a residential property. And the request of the property owner was to zone it commercial. The other neighbors adjacent to this property might have been expecting that would be zoned R4, and now it's being zoned C2 potentially, that they might object to that and want to come and have their voices be heard. The short answer to the question is that this updating the official zoning map is not a quasi-judicial proceeding where you're looking at, specific property owner requests. It's a legislative matter because it affects the whole town. We've eliminated transitional zone district to have to rezone something. And we have notified by publishing in the Fort Collins, Colorado, and putting this on our website for months and having individual letters sent out there where I'm not saying that every person reads it the same way, but the notification has been that the map is proposed to be updated. Here's a copy of the draft map. Here's where you can go to find more information about it. And the notice has been provided that there's a change that's likely to occur. There's not an obligation to notify immediately adjacent property owners of every single change proposed on the map. But I understand that that's the intent that I heard, was that how do we hear from these individuals? And, the legal answer is we're providing notification of a future public hearing before the Board of Trustees will publish the, any changes to that zoning map will be advertised as this is the updated version. And everyone will have the same opportunity to see that information, whether they read it or not, or whether they make assumptions or what have you, is something that's outside of our control.
I think that's the kicker, is if they're not legally obligated to provide letters to those adjacent property owners, then we can just do this, correct?
At this point, you're considering recommendations to a draft map. If that's the commission's desire, we can certainly change the map. We'll advertise it as such. For the number of the 2 changes that we've heard tonight, potential 2 changes, we can put a note on that map and highlight these addresses we're proposed to change. We can do quite a bit to try to draw attention to the fact that there were some changes discussed tonight. And try to be as transparent as possible on our website, on our notifications, and on the map itself. Is that a palatable approach to identifying these were the changes that were discussed?
Absolutely, because then any affected homeowners still have the opportunity to appear at the public hearing with the Board of Trustees before it gets adopted.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we're saying we're changing it to C2 for that property owner that couldn't be here.
But the recommendation, if that's the will of the commission, I think what I'm hearing is if you're looking to make a change, you're proposing to change the recommendation on the draft map. Right.
Correct.
And we can put some notes to highlight the fact that there was a change proposed for that address.
Yeah, if you look under staff recommendations at the end of the executive summary, clearly we're beyond option 1. Looks like we're at option 2 with the following changes included. So I think we know where we're going.
Well, like you've got to figure it out.
I like where we're going.
You
I think
motion to that effect?
with only 2 changes. This is
That was it.
motion with the changes.
Yeah, we did hear from Commissioner Chalet, asked if we'd heard from any others, and we've heard from a dozen or more property owners. And again, we've encouraged all of them to attend public hearings, even though they reach out to town staff. We always tell them these should still come. you can see we didn't have all those attendees here. But the ones, primarily the answers or the questions that we were hearing were the three primary ones that we kind of covered. Those were kind of prevalent themes. We have addressed some other, sites specific or property specific questions that others may have asked. Mr. Whalen, were there any specific property inquiries that came up that might be worth highlighting that you can recall? Yeah, if you've got some. Well, Paul's working his way up here. Paul's our senior planner. Has taken a number of those phone calls from property owners that reached out responding to our letter. We'll just ask him to kind of highlight if there were other specific property inquiries or questions that might weigh on the planning commission's recommendation.
Thank you, Cody.
Thanks, Paul.
Most of the comments were addressed in the PowerPoint presentation, but one individual at 3709 McKinley, Mr. Barnes, he's in the process of selling his home. And I met with him on, I believe, Friday. He is transitionally zoned, and he realizes his property was going to be rezoned, but he was also concerned about, he got some adjacent neighbors, and he was concerned that R4 would allow uses on those adjacent properties that could impact his ability to sell his property. And one of the examples he made was that he had his house pretty much under contract and ready to be sold. When there was mention that some alternative land use could go on to those one of those adjacent properties, he said that the potential buyer walked away because he didn't want to live next to, say, a professional office or a his specific was a child care facility. So those are some of his concerns, but he did realize that he had transitional zone that was going to be rezoned, but in discussing the possibilities, he had no solution for what he would like to be rezoned as. The only thing he wanted to make sure was that his ability to move his property was protected from adverse land uses due to the R4 zone. And I tried to explain to him the process of the site plan going for the planning commission, that the site plan process could have stipulations on the development of any adjacent property. But there'd be a process that the town would go through to ensure that neighbors' comments and concerns were addressed in the event that something came in under the R4 zone. So, but yeah, I think he's in Arizona now, but I think he was represented here with the name. So.
I think most of those R4 uses are conditional, are they not?
They are the consideration that was given in the R4. There was quite a bit of discussion on whether or not some of the commercial uses should be allowed as a use by right, as opposed to conditional or not allowed at all. I think when you look at your table of uses in Article 4, the balance that was kind of landed upon during the land use code drafting was to allow a limited number of business uses in the in the R4 zone district, but to place them as conditional, which means they have to go through a hearing process to establish them. It included commercial childcare centers, professional offices, salons, art studios. There were a couple of business uses identified that would be generally compatible with the residential character of the neighborhoods, but that warranted a specific hearing to consider those particular uses.
So in this case, if the property owner neighbor decided they wanted to be professional offices, they would have to come and get that conditional use, and the neighbor, the property owner, would have an opportunity to speak at that meeting legally.
Yes.
Okay,
Which I tried to assure him that there's
okay.
a process that we would take those things into consideration, the landscape, the buffer, to make sure, you know, address the code issues, site development issues, parking. And that he was afraid that would affect his ability to sell his house. So I was like, well, we could have a childcare facility to sell.
That's gonna be my comment. I mean, adverse land impacts are pretty broad. One person might not want to live next to a daycare, but the next buyer would die to live next to an art studio. So
Yeah.
without a clear, path of what he wanted to see done, I
Yeah,
thank you for the comment, but I don't know what we're really supposed to action on that.
yeah.
Okay.
I think it's good in illustrating some of the questions and concerns that we typically hear in processes like this. And, to a large extent, Mr. Whalen did a good job of explaining, when we get those questions, we try to provide a path in the code that this is what is allowed, this is what's not allowed. If this is allowed, this is what they have to satisfy in order to do that. Most of the code and protections are in there to make sure that any change of a development on a property is compatible with its surrounding environment. So although childcare center, art studio, and other uses or they're commercial in nature are allowed in the R4 zone district, they require a conditional use hearing, and then the planning commission and the board of trustees are gonna look at that specific development plan. Is screening addressed? Have you buffered from your neighbor's properties? Is that architectural change gonna be compatible with the neighborhood? So there are protections in place to satisfy exactly what this particular property owner was asking about.
Okay. Thanks, Paul.
Any other questions for staff tonight?
Not for staff. I think we're at the end of the road here. I think Tim said, anybody want to take a stab at the motion to do this thing?
Sure. So I'll make a motion to forward the recommendation to the Board of Trustees to approve the official zoning map with the changes including, and that would be on 8311 Sixth Street. The zoning will be R4. On 8317 Sixth Street, the zoning will be R4. And 3731 Harrison will be zoned C2.
Second.
Second.
Can I ask a question first?
A motion moved and seconded is debatable.
Okay, thank you.
Just, I guess, the clarification on the one property that we're still waiting
Right,
for.
that's what I was
Yeah,
getting
for input back from. How does that fit into the motion?
I see. So as I heard it, the motion was to approve the official zone map. Or to forward a recommendation to the board of trustees to approve the official zone map. Subject to making changes to the properties at 8311 Sixth Street to R4, 8317 Sixth Street to R4. Perhaps the amendment might be to also include if the owner of 8321, I think. Yeah, 8321 Sixth Street desires to have R4 to also make that change and then circle back and close with 3731 Harrison to be zoned C2.
8321 pending.
And
Conversation.
conversations with the owner for their
With the property
desire
owner.
for R4 versus C1.
Yeah.
Okay,
I like it in spirit, yeah.
okay. And we can certainly handle that. I think the motion being made and seconded, if there's a desire to amend it, you have to do an amendment motion. The second would also have to agree to that amendment.
Take another crack at it there too.
So procedurally, do I have to say a motion to amend? Is that the next step?
If that's your, yeah,
Yeah, I wish to clarify what I originally motion, but procedurally is to ask for a motion to amend our original motion. Is that correct?
yes, it would be, I move to amend the motion to include the following. And then you restate your motion.
Okay, we'll try this again. Thank you. So I make a motion to amend that the board, planning commission, forward recommendation of the board of trustees to approve the official zoning map with the following changes included. That 8311 Sixth Street be zoned R4 8317 Sixth Street be zoned R4. And that 8321 Sixth Street will be zoned depending on the desires of the property owner with discussions with town staff. And that the fourth one would be 3731 Harrison would be zoned C2.
That sounded good to me. I think the original second was McCaffrey.
Second,
So you.
I'm in my second.
Perfect.
Roll call, please.
It's been,
Commissioner-
I'm sorry, it's been moved and seconded, the following, and the amendment has been amended, so now we can do roll call. Thank you.
Commissioner Whitehouse,
Yes.
McCaffrey,
Yes.
Moyer,
Yes.
Shalay,
Yes.
Knapp,
Yes.
Sarner.
Yes. All right, well, that was fun, fellas. Thanks for all that.
I just think this is why we're here.
That's exactly why we're here. Exactly why we're here. That was perfect. All right, moving on. There's more.
Oh, this one's a big one. No.
You know, I just need to get back to the on that. Yes. Next one, we need to adopt the 2023 schedule of the planning commission. Mr. Burke.
This one's pretty straightforward. The purpose for doing this is by municipal code, the planning commission typically meets on the first Monday of each month. However, every year, there are at least two, sometimes more conflicts with the first Monday for recognized national holidays. And in those instances, it's been the practice of the planning commission to conduct business on the following Monday. So with that, kind of past historical practice in place, we always interfere with Labor Day. And usually a 4th of July or some other holiday that's a rotating one. So based on the 2023 calendar schedule and past practices of the planning commission, staff prepared the proposed agenda or the proposed meeting schedule that's in your agenda packet for your consideration. The couple of dates that are impacted by holidays were highlighted, and we also highlighted the submission closing dates that those were impacted as well. I think the first meeting of January typically falls close to, or has been falling close to New Year's Day or national holiday, so we moved that to January 9th. And the same thing with Labor Day, I think got moved to the second Monday of September.
Anybody have any comments or want to discuss further any of the dates that are on here?
We go through these individually.
Or how it works. Okay, if no one has any comments and we're all good with the dates, we have a motion to approve the 2023 calendar.
I move to adopt the schedule of planning commission meeting and submission dates for the 2023 calendar year.
Second.
Awesome, roll call.
Commissioner Whitehouse,
Yes.
McCaffrey,
Yes.
Moyer,
Yes.
Shalay,
Yes.
Knapp,
Yes.
Sarner.
Yes. Motion passes.
I just noticed something. It says January 3rd, 2023. I'm looking at my calendar, that's a Tuesday. When I look, that's the wrong.
That's the submission date.
You're in the middle.
Okay, never mind. Got it, thanks.
Yeah, how do we all miss that? Okay, that's it for business items. Cody, any announcements?
I have a couple of quick announcements. The last meeting, I gave an announcement that town staff had submitted an application for a grant funding opportunity for affordable housing. We were awarded that grant. The town's receiving $52,500, which will fund the 75% of the grant project for that particular application was submitted. The town's match will be $17,500, and those funds are budgeted in the 2023 town budget approved by the board of trustees. So it's great that we're backfilling that with grant money. So we're really excited to start that process. Housing affordability is a nationwide crisis, but it's particularly acute here in Colorado. So staff is really excited to be able to administer these grant funds to look at housing needs assessment, to find where the gaps are, for Wellington specific, as it comes to housing affordability. It'll include a code analysis, even though we've recently updated our land use code. It doesn't have some of the specific ideas and provisions that other communities are looking at to promote and incentivize affordable housing. So we'll do a code analysis, and it will include recommendations for potential code amendments that we can adopt to promote and encourage affordable housing within our community. So we're really excited to start that process. It will be, if we're successful in completing all the proposed amendments that might result from that program, it would also enable us to be eligible for additional affordable housing grant funds in the future, including construction grants. So this is really a good way to get our foot in the door and get into the pipeline for bigger projects. So we're really excited to take this undertaking on. To implement this program, I am going to ask for a group of community volunteers to act on I'll call it a steering committee for now. We haven't quite established a group and what its role will be. But we want to have a really diverse viewpoints and perspectives from the community. So we're going to ask our board of trustees, our planning commission. I'll be reaching out to Housing Catalyst, Habitat for Humanity, our Wellington Housing Authority, and include some partners from some of our maybe underrepresented groups like our seniors, our different cultural, our Hispanic community, and other underserved minority populations to make sure that their voices are heard in this scenario as well. So I'm going to ask for the planning commission if you could appoint someone. I know it's a really ambiguous description of what that individual might be doing, but I'd like to have a representative from the planning commission serve in that capacity for affordable housing grants. So is anyone on the commission interested in serving in that capacity?
Are you gonna be the habitat user?
I would be interested.
And if it's not a formal appointment, but by a straw poll, not a heads, does the commission okay with Commissioner Moyer participating in that capacity?
I think she'd be okay.
Yes.
Yes.
The source of those funds, state or federal?
They are state funds. They're allocated through the Department of Local Affairs. I don't know offhand if that particular funding source originated with federal funds or not. I'd have to do some more research into that.
I'm curious to know if we could get matching funds from somewhere to fill the town's portion, because certainly we talked about some of that stuff in other programs that you might be able to get funds from a different source to match this, and that might take the financial burden off of the town. It's just throwing it out there.
I'm not aware of those opportunities for this particular grant, but if an opportunity comes along that we learn about, we'll absolutely take a look at that. One other quick announcement. Thank you for that feedback. I'll be in touch with Commissioner Moyer regarding the housing affordability grant and that participation. One other quick announcement along the same vein of grants. Other town staff, not myself, but other town staff is working on applying for a grant to install a landscape demonstration garden around the new town office building on 3rd Street. You might recall, some of you were on the commission when that went through site plan review, and it had a landscape plan. We were scrutinizing, making sure that we had an appropriate water-wise landscape there. But that approval happened before we had our irrigation and landscape standards updated. And we didn't have an opportunity at the time to apply for a demonstration garden. So we're pursuing that, trying to get those free dollars to help us install an even better landscape than what was originally designed and approved for that site. I did take a look at the review. We do have a landscape design by a qualified landscape designer. And it falls under the administrative provisions for a change to an approved landscape plan to modify the landscaping. But I want to let the planning commission know that we are looking at that. If the grant is successful, I have already approved the design as an administrative adjustment to that site plan. So pending the results of the grant application, if we're successful, we'll be moving in that direction. It really will be a nice project for the town. So I just wanted to let you know that is a change to the landscape plan if it's successful that you will see.
Is it possible, especially since we're rolling out something new, is not to throw a monkey wrench into this, but could there be an educational component? You know, if you're going to do something that actually sort of supports and demonstrates this, or is it possible to have an educational component, so people might be able to understand a little better from, you know,
Yeah.
showing something, that's all.
That's definitely something that staff has thought about. I don't know the ins and outs of that particular grant application to know if it covers the educational component or if it encourages it. But we're definitely thinking about that, and I'll keep you in the loop as we learn more as to what we can accomplish through that grant or what might be a separate effort. But that definitely point well taken that the educational component that goes along with the demonstration garden is extremely valuable.
That's great.
Congratulations on all the extra funding and just the possibilities that opens up.
Thank you. We're very excited for them.
You're okay.
Those are the only ones I had.
Anything else?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. All right, I think we're good then. Adjourned. All right.